Hello, everyone. Welcome back. If I can have you take your seats. I would now like to introduce Shireen Salti, the Executive Director of the Canadian Arab Institute, who is the moderator for the closing panel discussion, our last panel discussion of the 2022 Victoria Forum. This session is titled The Key Takeaways and the Way Forward for Bridging Divides. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It is my absolute honor to welcome Her Honor the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, Elizabeth Dowdeswell, on stage, as well as Dr. Littlechild. I would like to thank the University of Victoria and the Senate of Canada for really organizing an incredible forum, the Victoria Forum. Thank you so much. Special thanks to Dr. Adil Gaitouni, an incredible leader at the University of Victoria, who invited me here to moderate this amazing panel, the closing plenary. It is my absolute honor to join you both today. Well, why don't we start right away with the key takeaways? We heard a lot of evidence-based conversations. Dr. Littlechild, what were some of your key takeaways from the forum, and what really resonated with you in the past few days?
Well, before I answer that, I want to just take a moment to thank you in my language. Kininaskompno gakyo igokoma mstaiga bigskotamak. Emiosik bigskor uksik semanto naskama. Einamago akta kiskao kueskse takuis wakotoyak. So I use my language because it is the UN International Decade of Indigenous Languages. And if I might just pause for 1 minute to explain why I do that intentionally, is because the Secretary General of the United Nations once said, recently actually, that an Indigenous language one dies every 2 weeks, because the last living speaker of the language has gone on to the next world. So I am proud to be able to speak my language and thanking you with my language. As far as takeaways, I have a little bit of a challenge with that word in itself, because it seems like we're taking away something from someone, when actually it has been just a tremendously rich contribution and input by all of you at this forum. So I would rather focus on that perspective of your contributions. So, for example, the large number of different topics that we discussed over the last few days, beginning with opening night on the turf, truth, and reconciliation. I recall when we were sitting as commissioners of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to look at the saddest darkest, most unknown chapter of Canadian history, which was on Indian residential schools, we asked each other, what is reconciliation to you? And we came up with, I think, a common definition, if I can say it that way, between the three of us, that it's about restoring respectful relationships. And the Commonwealth Games have that opportunity to do exactly that, to help us restore respectful relationships among all peoples. So I had a little difficulty with, I know what it means, and I know it's often used, but just the word takeaway, it's like you're driving into a McDonald's or something, and you're going to take out an order. But in the, seriously, in the discussions, for me, it was about the role of sport in bridging not only economic, social, and environmental divides around the world, but other divides. But let me talk a little bit about the first one, as we just concluded what I would call at the United Nations, they call them side events, but it's actually a special event when we break out into smaller groups to discuss specific topics. We just finished with a discussion on the economic divides. And I see, I think from that, there's a dichotomy in and that of itself, the economic divides. And by that I mean the Commonwealth Games offer a tremendous opportunity for benefit, different kinds of benefits. And you then must look at the costs of those benefits, the economic cost of the games. When we look at the social divides, I can't help but think and repeat, actually, I think what I said earlier in a different forum here, that the social divides, to me, really are about offering our youth a positive choice in life for the future. That's the social gap we need to offer through the games, or close through the games. And of course, the environmental aspect is to leave a zero or no footprint behind as a result of the games. And I know I'm focusing mainly on the upcoming Commonwealth Games because I would like to rely only on my background and my experience in that area. The rich dialogue and variety of topics were offered to us as a benefit by the hosts and to us as participants. And the dichotomy of that is, like I said earlier in a previous panel on the power of sport, I talked about the unfortunate choice that some of our youth, at least Indigenous youth, the choice that they have of life or suicide, addictions, gangs, and so on, drugs. My dream is that these games will be the cleanest and ethical and inclusive games. I want to also share with you a recent experience I had with the Mayan brothers and sisters in this area. You know the Mayan calendar, I'm sure you've seen it. There's a 5,000-year calendar that came to an end just recently. And when the media reported that the calendar was going to come to an end, actually they couched it and mischaracterized it as the Mayan people were saying that the world is coming to an end, when it really only was the calendar. But in closing that 5,000-year-old calendar, they said goodbye to grandfather's son. And then they had an all-night prayer ceremony. They stopped 4 times and made 4 prophecies. But when the sun came up, we went to the top of a temple to welcome baby son, they said. And that was the start of the new calendar. But when the newspapers were read, I think it was something like 10,000 Canadians went out and bought extra groceries and all kinds of different engines or anything to save their lives, because it was going to be the end of it all. But in the prophecies, the spiritual leaders, the first time they stopped during the night, and I was blessed to be chosen as one of the people to come and witness right at the sacred fire, the spiritual leaders, and through an interpreter, explained to me what was being said by the spiritual leaders and elders. And the first thing they said was, things will get better if. Things will get better if spirituality comes back to leadership, or leadership comes back to spirituality. And I thought it was quite interesting they couched it that way in their language. And then the second part was that things will get better when women take a more important and necessary lead on issues. And I see that just in the organization of this particular forum, and I don't know if it was done intentionally, but it either actually happened by chance or these prophecies are coming true. Because we opened our forum with a prayer song, and then the panel members were mostly women taking on a leadership role. And thirdly, they said things will get better if we build on the strengths of our people. So if we build on the strengths of each other as human beings, things will get better. But the last one, they said, was going to be the most difficult one. The fourth stop in the ceremony, the leader said, we must work very, very hard on unity. And when I think back to the definition of reconciliation, about restoring respectful relationships, that's one call there where we're going to have to work very, very hard together. And then things will definitely change. So the Commonwealth Games offers us that opportunity. And it's also about winning in life. It's not just about winning in sports or in games, but the 4 prophecies by the Mayan spiritual leaders is about winning in life. We have a similar opportunity in the Leguanan Declaration on Truth, Reconciliation, and Partnership that incorporates this formula for success. In our traditional law, we're offered some instructions about balance. And in order to win in life, you look at the 4 elements of life. The physical element. And we know that the sport offers that opportunity through physical activity to actually bring that to life, that element, that instruction. And next one, of course, is about the mental element of life, the mental health aspect, for example, through sport. And then very importantly, culture, the cultural part. And old people always tell us, be proud of who you are in this discussion about these 4 elements of life. And lastly, the most important one is the spiritual element. It's almost like this building here with the 4 walls. That wall here could be the physical wall. You must be careful of what you put into your mind and in your mouth. Take care of your physical self. Exercise. That might be the mental element, the mental wall, to again be careful of what you put in your mind, but more so about discipline as well, disciplining yourself. And behind me might be the cultural part, to be proud of who you are. And those 3 walls, if you spend so much time on one of the 3 of them and ignore the last one, the most important one, the spiritual wall, again, old people tell us never be afraid to pray. And sport offers us that too. For example, we have a sacred run. Every 4 years, there's a sacred run from the northern tip of Alaska to the southern tip of South America. And it's a spiritual sacred run with a lance. Because there's a prophecy that the eagle is going to meet the condor in the future. And when that happens, things are going to change for the better of Indigenous peoples. But again, with the other if, there's 4 things happen that the elders prophesied through the ceremonies. And we don't normally talk about these kinds of topics, but they're a very essential part of sport. The idea of becoming a champion, for example. In our games, I talked about the Indigenous games. I said that we don't have a gold, silver, and bronze medal presentation. We have a first winner and a second winner because everyone that participates is a winner. And likewise here, you are all winners just being here. So I commend you and thank you for that. In our language, we say opintuin, to lift each other up. Opintuin. And what are the last 5 letters on that? We say opintuin, means to lift each other up, but it's also to win. Again, I stress, it's about winning in life. And there's 4 teachings in that one as well. It's about the ceremonies that we have, for example, the pipe ceremony, the rock that the stone is made from represents the mountains. But the teaching in that is that it's about strength. And then when you put the stem, the pipe stem, together with that, the stem represents the trees and the forests. And you'll notice it's always straight. And the instruction there is about honesty. About honesty. And then we talk about the eagle feather. And the teaching there is that's the highest honor you can receive in our culture. But it also is about sharing. Because the 4-leggeds, they die so that we can live. They share their life. And lastly, when you see a braid of sweetgrass, it's usually braided in 3 strands. And it doesn't matter how strong you are. If you try to break that braid of sweetgrass, you won't be able to do it. But once you unravel it, of course, it falls apart. But the teaching in that is that when you light that sweetgrass, your prayer goes to Great Spirit immediately. And if you put your hand over the sweetgrass, the smoke as it rises, you won't feel anything. But the instruction there is about kindness. So in the Cree principles of leadership, we have honesty, kindness, sharing, and strength. And that's how we're taught to approach activity like the Commonwealth Games. So it's really, really important that I share that with you, I think, because we don't really have an opportunity to share that kind of information with each other. And the 4 instructions are really are about also the foundation of the World Indigenous Nations Games, the WIN Games, as we call them. In Brazil, the theme was about participation. It's in the participation that you're a winner. In Treaty 6, when we had the games, it was about peaceful coexistence, healing, and reconciliation. And we started the games with a grand entry to welcome everybody from the 4 corners of the world. But we also closed the games with a peace dance. Everyone got together and danced a peace dance. So the notion of peaceful coexistence, healing and reconciliation is incorporated also into the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. So the concluding remark I want to make is the contributions, biggest contribution for me leaving this forum is the draft of I want to respect the local Lakinan Declaration on on sport or truth and reconciliation and partnership. So I've really enjoyed the discussions that I was participant of, listening to very important contributions that some of you made in the forums that I attended anyway. I really want to thank you for that. And I'm sorry I'm taking so much of your time, but I wanted to sort of give an overview of the impact this particular forum had on me personally, because it brought back our traditional teachings. And what I hope for will also be brought back to the upcoming Commonwealth Games. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Littlechild. We're certainly all winners in your presence today, and I am personally in awe of your strength and wisdom, and I want to thank you for sharing your learnings with me earlier and today. Your Honor, we had a lot of constructive and evidence-based conversations that took place in the last few days. We focused on results and bridging divides and building bridges between different groups, Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. We talked about how the notion of trust translates at an individual level as well as a systemic level. I'm wondering what resonated with you in the past few days in terms of learnings.
Thank you very much. And as this is my first opportunity on stage, let me certainly pay my respects to Indigenous people who have stewarded this land for millennia. I particularly find persistence and patience absolutely remarkable. So, Haishka. It's a real privilege for me in this final panel to actually be able to reflect on the richness, and I use the same word as you did because that was my personal perception as well, the richness of 3 days of such important conversation. It was an organic conversation, I found, absolutely inspiring insights, and as you just suggested, I am in awe of the wisdom of people like Dr. Littlechild. So I can't possibly do it all justice, but what I tried to do was, as an outside observer, was to try and draw some threads together about what I learned, what I personally learned, and what resonated with me in the last 2 days. The first thing I would say is how important it is to be having this conversation right now. This is a very significant moment. It's a moment of uncertainty, and without being absolutely negative about it, we are actually experiencing at least 3 crises, 3 global crises, all at the same time. We have a global pandemic that most of us have never faced before, and we're certainly not through it and won't be for some time. At the same time, we're faced with the existential threat of climate change, and we already know that we're starting to see the results and the impact of that. And certainly in our country, where in fact our north is actually, I would say, a living laboratory for understanding what climate change is all about and what its effects are going to be. And then on top of that, we have this absolutely unthinkable war. A change in geopolitics worldwide that's having an effect on all of us. And so all of those 3 things and the resulting impact on our economies, on our societies, on our environment, are all happening at the same time. So in this moment of uncertainty, the world certainly needs to come together, but it's really an inflection point, I think. And so we can do one of two things. We can either wring our hands in despair, or we can say there have been real lessons that we've learned during COVID, and what are we going to do with those lessons that we've learned? Are we actually going to use them as a moment of opportunity to make some changes? And for me, that's the question that is so important coming out of the dialogue that we've had here the last 3 days. Let me make just a couple of observations about what I think we have observed during COVID. And I base that not only on what I heard here that resonated with what I've heard in my jurisdiction, because I've had the opportunity to actually reach out to leaders throughout the province of Ontario during COVID to ask people how they're doing, to ask them what they're seeing and what they're learning. The first thing has to do with collaboration. The first word out of people's mouths would be, "Isn't it wonderful to see all orders of government collaborating?" And then they'd laugh and say, "But that won't last." And my response to that was always, "Why not?" And I would still make that comment about why not, because the world does need to come together. The second observation would be about evidence-based policy. Certainly many of us who've had experience in the public service have long cried for evidence-based policy, and we don't see it very often. And certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, we really did develop a trust in the science. We relied on it because somebody else knew something that we knew nothing about. And so trusting in science and evidence-based policy became more important than it has in many years. The third observation I'd make is that we saw a dynamism and a creativity that we were all capable of. Even our enterprises were able to pivot, were able to make changes when those changes were needed. So we can actually do that. And perhaps we need to demand more creativity from our institutions. The fourth observation has to do with community building. And that, for me, was the most powerful, seeing how things could actually happen at the local level. And it reinforced for me the importance of subnational governments. The level of municipal governance, for example, that we pay so little attention to, is really the level of government that is closest to people. And I think we saw that in spades when it came to the pandemic. But the last two observations are perhaps the most important. One of those is about our interdependence. I mentioned that the crises we were looking at right now were all global crises. And I think we've seen interdependence in so many ways. Some of you were talking actively, for example, about supply chains. Who knew that we were so interdependent in terms of what we needed, whether it was pandemic equipment or whether it was vaccines? Who knew that we are not going to get out of this global pandemic until we can vaccinate the rest of the world? That we are so interdependent. Who knew that there was such interdependence between the economic sector and the social sector, for example? I don't recall when I've heard in a period of time so many people in what we would call the economic sector actually realizing that until we solve or deal with issues that they would call women's issues in the social sector, like childcare, that we would never get back to or achieve the kind of economic prosperity that people really want. So the interdependence across sectors at all levels has been so important. And many, many more examples that came up in your conversations as well. And the last observation I'd make about COVID is that inequities in our beloved country have really been laid bare. In some places, we've done serious damage to the social fabric of our country. And much as we love where we live, and we're so proud of where we live, there are real questions to be asked. As we experience just an unmistakable hunger for normalcy, people rushing back to normal, I think that people aren't looking for the old normal. They're looking for a better normal. And the real question that comes out of dialogues such as the ones we've had here for 3 days are about how do we get there. We need to take time for genuine dialogue and conversation. And those conversations about what matters and who matters. We're going to continue to be tested. And we've heard during the course of these days some brutally frank and honest perspectives. But we've also showcased and amplified case studies and stories of empathy that need to be paid attention to. And it certainly isn't my job or even my possibility to be prescriptive about how we might design a way forward. But I do have 3 or 4 things that I think I heard coming from you that resonated with me. And the first one actually I think is quite obvious, but some of you might not assume it that way. And that is that sustainability is really a very appropriate policy framework to try and achieve some form of resiliency. Whenever you can bring social cohesion, economic prosperity, environmental stewardship together, you're much more likely, in my view, to end up with public policy decisions that really have a chance of real success. And even though in our conversations we split panels into various of those 3 aspects, what intrigued me most was when the conversation turned organic. And so you'd find that the economic panel was talking about the social issues, or the social panel was talking about environmental issues. And that seems to me a sign that we are on the right track. And if we can try harder to get rid of the silos, complexity really isn't very well solved by silos and disciplines that aren't open to looking at other disciplines. And so I think we need to try harder at systemic and holistic thinking. And that's what a sustainability framework allows us to do. The second thing I would say about the way forward is that we have many of the tools. You've just heard compelling stories about the power of sport. And that's just one example. I think if we'd had a panel about the compelling stories coming from arts and culture or from science, pardon me, you'd hear the same thing. The arts, for example, we've often described them as the connective tissue of society. And I fully believe that they're actually going to be what help us heal in the long run. The third thing is, and it may be the hardest, is that I think what we need is real mindset change. And we're at the edges of that. For just a number of examples, we're now talking about co-creation, for example, real partnership. And that certainly has come through in the conversations about the aspirations of Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. We don't know how to do transitions very well. We don't know how to scale for impact. Those are things that we need to change our mindsets about. We need to change our mindsets about consultation, when really what we want is true engagement. It's not just enough to consult. We have to really engage. We have to have the humility and the courage to actually really listen. One of the things that I think was obvious in these 3 days is people came with open hearts and open minds, and that's the starting point. We have to have the courage to be able to listen to those who may not agree with us, to actually try and understand, because that's where the empathy really starts. And much as you have, lived through so many Zoom calls in the last 3 years, I often thought, and they were well-meaning people who organized those Zoom calls, but most of the time we didn't have the right people at the table. And so we end up with people preaching to the converted or reinforcing each other when it really are those who are not there that need to find a place at the table. I think we need to, in many cases, change the narrative. For me, in my learning journey about the Indigenous world, the most important thing for me is to return to the notion of kinship. It's a word that we don't tend to use in modern society. And yet that is, I think, what was at the heart of treaty making, and I think we need to return to that. I have the great privilege of being able to witness, and I do that a lot, and each time I do, I personally learn something about kinship, and that's what relationships are all about. The thing that gives me hope at the end of this period of time that really fuels my optimism is actually the vocabulary. I did a little exercise of the words that were important to me that I kept hearing in various panels. And let me just give you some examples. Dignity, respect, solidarity, sharing. We make progress at the speed of trust, hope, social contracts, belonging, ideas that are grounded in joy. And although I didn't hear it, it reminded me when I was looking at the African panel in particular, the roundtable, of the Ubuntu saying, "I am because we are." That should, for me, that fills me with optimism, it fills me with hope. Not to say that the way ahead is going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination, but it's worth doing. And finally, the thing that drives me and my interest has to do with this grand project of democracy. In my view, democracy is so much more than talking about votes. Democracy is the way we choose to live together as a society. And that's democracy within our province, within our world, within our neighborhoods. And so seeing how fragile it is, seeing the cracks in the very institutions that support our democracy, our foundational institutions, remind us that we are incredibly vulnerable. We're mutually vulnerable, and we have to be really vigilant. So as I leave, I would presume to offer two messages. One is a very simple one of gratitude. Haishka, Miigwech, merci, thank you. And it's for what I have learned and what I continue to learn on my journey. And all of you have been a part of helping me to do that. So my first message. But my second message is one of empowerment. For me, these conversations are deeply personal. I too am an immigrant, as many of you are, but I've also learned that everyone can make a difference. And when we're talking about this grand project of democracy and of making a better society, making a world that works for everyone, it seems to me that we need to feel empowered. I once, not so long ago, went back to Belfast, which is where I was born. And I had the privilege of being part of a conference that brought together young people from war-torn countries all over the world. And it was a conference about telling stories, very poignant stories, very heartfelt stories, but that resulted in hope. What were we going to do to ensure that these young people had lives ahead of them? It was about building community, and it was about sharing those stories of survival. But for me, the most symbolic thing that happened was as we arrived and drove into the central part of Belfast, somebody had changed all the street signs in the downtown core. That someone happened to be Bono, and U2. Maybe that's a generational recognition of musicians, but he was Irish after all, or he is Irish after all. But he had deliberately gone around and changed all the street signs so they said, "Way ahead, not closed." Think about that. Way ahead, not closed. And although I shouldn't be admitting it publicly, I actually took one of those street signs. And it has survived in my various home offices for the last number of years. For me, it was just so inspirational. It was just such a metaphor for how I think in this country we are so fortunate. We can live our lives with that motto, way ahead, not closed. So my gratitude to all of you for being a part of my learning journey, and my wish to all of you that you take away from this meeting a sense of empowerment, that we are at this moment of inflection when we really can make a difference. Thank you.
Your Honor, thank you so much. Thank you for your ability to demonstrate that trust is intrinsic to relationships, that leadership is about holding room for complexity and not about simplifying issues. I am certainly walking away with a sense of solidarity, hope, and courage as a young woman because of you today, so thank you very much. We do have about 12 minutes left for Q&A. I would love to take one or two questions from the audience. I see someone standing near the mic there.
There is a question came from online audience. So it's saying, it's going to Dr. Littlechild, and it's saying, I am interested in the idea of marrying spirituality with leadership. Would you mind elaborating a bit more on why re-enchanting our world is essential to tackling our grand challenges? Why religion, spirituality should play a role in our conversations? Thank you.
I'm sorry, we didn't hear the last bit of that, if you don't mind repeating.
Why religion, spirituality should play a role in our conversations?
The role of religion and spirituality in our conversations.
I'm not sure I understand the question, but the four elements of life, as we're taught, the physical, the mental, the cultural, and spiritual, they're incorporated as a formula for success in winning in life or winning in sport or business or whatever undertaking that you embark on. And you notice I didn't use the word religion. It's spirituality, which is a little bit different, I think, because it's more holistic in a sense. And it plays such a tremendous role in life, in everything that we do. The spiritual aspect of sport, for example, the sacred runs that we do, the sacred bundle that we run with to game site to game site. It's just the key to success, as far as I'm concerned. It's the key to success. And as I said, our old people tell us, never be afraid to pray. I remember one time I was at the United Nations, and I was asked by the delegations to go and ask the chairperson if we could open the meeting with a prayer. And I was told, Mr. Littlechild, you know we don't pray at the United Nations. And I said, well, it's not really a prayer, it's a Thanksgiving, it's an invocation. And I said, how long is that going to take? She said, I'll give you 3 minutes. So I went back to the elders and I said, we can open a meeting with a prayer. So they came, and coincidentally 4 elders with 4 drums, hand drums, and they're singing this prayer song. Ya 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 ya. She poked me on the arm. How long is this going to take? It's 7 minutes already, she said. But the significance of that incident is that every meeting now at the UN opens and closes with a prayer. And I think that was an important contribution by our indigenous spiritual elders to offer that. I'll tell you another quick one, because it's an elder story as well. And you remember the word about contributions that I prefer than takeaways? This old man was asked to address the UN about climate change and environmental protection of Mother Earth. He got up in front of all the presidents, prime ministers, ambassadors, delegations, leaders, and he said, which one of you is going to argue for my brother, the bird that flies in the skies? Which one among you is going to pray or speak for my brother, the fish that swims in the waters? Who among you is going to speak and talk about clean air and clean water? And you could hear a pin drop. But the next day, interestingly, the UN started talking about environmental protection and also about climate change. And again, it was one of our elders who brought that up to the UN, so that we now have a daily discussion really on those aspects. Because he said that's where we're all the same. We breathe the same air and we drink the same water. So why not also speak collectively for their protection? So environmental stewardship and the idea of spirituality were contributions by indigenous peoples to humankind, I thought.
Next question.
Thank you very much for your contribution to lead us in a review of the last 3 days at this forum. David Spence is my name. I'm with the Royal Commonwealth Society, Vancouver Island. One of the difficulties I have of distinguishing is winning on the field and winning in life. Could you describe a little bit more distinctively the difference between the sport of winning and the life that we want to achieve that has a success for all people? On the field, it's only one team or one individual that crosses the finish line first. Whereas in life, I'm gathering that there is an intention that all of us cross the finish line together.
Actually, I witnessed that in the Indigenous games, where we don't separate abled athletes from disabled persons. And in a 400-meter race, one time in the Indigenous games, the front runner girl was from, she was obviously physically challenged, but she was leading, and just before she got to the finish line, she stopped. And she waited for the person behind her to catch up to her, and then took her by the hand and ran across the line together. And I thought that was a very important message to us about winning in life and winning in sport, or learning how to compete or lose. But there's a different aspect to it as well. And I'm struggling to recall the example I was going to use, except that I don't know, many of you probably have never tried this. Some of you, by looking at you, are too young. But have you ever tried to walk on a railway track by yourself? Some have, okay. So you know that you can walk on one rail and eventually you fall off. And then you get back on the rail. And then if your friend walks on the other rail and the other, and you take your friend's hand like this, you can walk for miles and miles together on that railway track. You know why? Because you're supporting each other. And that's what you're doing here with the games. So that's why I feel so strongly that in the four elements of life, spirituality is the most important. And in this case as well, support. It gives you support and spiritual strength to help each other and work together with each other. But I know those are not really good answers to your question, but that's really the only reflection I can give back.
We're right on time. That concludes our panel for today. Thank you so much for allowing me to be in your presence today. I'm quite honored, to say the least, and thank you all for listening and for being such an engaging audience. We really appreciate your time and energy. And for now, I believe we will turn on to the concluding remarks. Thank you.
Wow, thank you for that wonderful closing plenary. Your Honour, Chief Littlechild, Shireen Salti, you've done a tremendous job in closing the Victoria Forum for us and closing the loop from where we began only 2 days ago. It seems like an awful lot has happened in the last 2 days, but you have summarized it incredibly well. So thank you very much for your efforts. I just have some closing comments, if you would just stay with me for a few minutes. If we think about where we started 2 days ago with Her Honour Janet Austin, Bob Ray and Ovid Mercury, they brought home how personal the issues we're talking about are. Over the last couple of days, we've talked about things like dignity and kindness, which don't normally fit within the domain of a conference like this, but the personal values came home very strongly. And I want to thank Tricia Thomas for doing such a great job of making us all reflect on how our own journeys, our own families, have shaped our values and shaped our views of the world. In between the opening and closing panels, we held 6 other plenaries and a total of 17 discussion sections. We covered an awful lot of ground, from social exclusion in the COVID era, to moving from an extractive approach to the natural world to a regenerative one, to closing economic divides. We had a powerful conversation with David Johnson this morning on trust, which reinforced the personal nature of the issues we've been discussing. One of the unique features of this year's Victoria Forum was the connection with the Commonwealth Games Federation and the Declaration on the Power of Sport, which will be signified by this paddle, this beautiful paddle, which all signatories to the Declaration will receive as a mark of their commitment and as part of the process to ensure that they follow through on their commitments. And we had a virtual panel on trust in Asia in an era of great power competition this morning. We also had the chance to delve deeper into these and other topics in our many smaller discussion sessions. And I, for one, and I assume it might be true for the rest of you, to paraphrase a Dilbert cartoon, our brains are now full. The discussions have been engaging and stimulating, and I'm sure we'll be reflecting on them for some time to come. This is, of course, the first step to developing solutions, and we welcome you all to continue on this journey with us. Before we close, I would like to say a few thank yous. I'd like to thank our sponsors again, our co-hosts, the University of Victoria and the Senate of Canada, and I should mention all of the senators who have joined us over the past 3 days, and all of the others who've joined us over the past 2 years with our virtual Victoria Forum events. I'd like to thank our founding sponsors, TELUS, Vancity, and the Gustafson School of Business. Our event sponsors, Power Corporation and the Government of Canada. I'd like to thank our organizational partners. As you realize, an initiative like this comes together from collaborating with others, like-minded individuals and organizations. Thank C40 Cities, the Global Resilience Institute, the National Consortium for Indigenous Economic Development, the Coalition for a Better Future, the South Island Prosperity Partnership, the Conference Board of Canada, the Global Business School Network, the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce, and the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. I would also like to thank our track chairs, who did all of the heavy lifting in putting the panels together. On the environmental divides, Ralph Chamey, Andy Hoffman, and Natalie Slawinski. On the economic divides, David Miller and Sudhir Nair. And on the social divides, Peter Taylor and Crystal Tremblay. I'd like to thank my colleagues on the Victoria Forum Executive Committee for their unstinting work over several years and their ongoing commitment to our mission of developing ideas for a better world. So thank you, Sebastian Beaulieu, Adele Gituni, Chris Horbaczewski, and Jim Munson. The work of putting on this forum has involved many volunteers, working with the guidance and assistance of Pascal and Ashley and their team at Connect 7, as well as the external relations team at the University of Victoria. On the Gustafson team, I'd like to thank Nuha Elgindi for all of her work over the past few months. I've still got more. Thank you. And then more than anyone else, I would like to say that this event has come together so well due to the Herculean efforts of one individual, and that's Venus Tamturk. Venus, I know she's in the back there. Venus, I hope you're listening. We're immensely grateful to you for taking on the role of conference manager at a late stage, and for your positivity, patience, and good humor throughout. Thank you, Venus. We are in your debt. Come on. Okay. And finally, thank you, Venus. To all of our speakers and delegates, thank you for joining us on this important journey. We have much work left to do, but it is immensely reassuring to know how many people are willing to work together with us to make a difference. Merci d'avoir sacrifié votre temps précieux pour être ici. Nous sommes impatients de poursuivre notre conversation avec vous. Jusque-là, au revoir. I would now ask Elder Frank George to help us close the 2022 Victoria Forum. Elder George?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frank George from the Songhees Nation. My traditional name is Kolkoletsa. Is my traditional name. I am Lekwungen. I would like to thank the Victoria Forum for including the Lekwungen community in all of your work. Thank you to the Victoria Forum, Commonwealth Games Committee, Gustafson, School of Business, and the University of Victoria for hosting. For the delegates traveling home, I wish you a safe journey home. Haichka, Sam, Haichka. I hope you had an excellent stay in Victoria while you were all here, delegates. Good to see you all, and you are all welcome to the traditional territory of the Lekwungen. Haichka, Sam, Haichka.
Elder George, thank you very much for helping us close this event so well.
Yep.
And a small token, a blanket, as we know, is such an important symbol of thank you and connection. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saul. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And now, we're just about done. We have a reception. Please join us, continue the conversation. We look forward to engaging with you at other Victoria Forum events. Stay connected and keep up the good work. Thank you all.